Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the chartered professional accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this CPA podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics. Hello, and welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of the Uncommon Sense podcast. The Heshe CPA Knowledge Center has been proud to bring you one episode a week, and sometimes two, of our podcast since September 2024. With this episode, we wrap up a successful first season with an episode that is both a celebration and a look back at a true turning point for the accounting profession in Alberta, and for the people whom that profession serves. July 1st of this year marks the 10th anniversary of the proclamation of Alberta's Chartered Professional Accountants Act, the provincial legislation that formalized the unification of the accounting profession in Alberta. That proclamation by the Government of Alberta brought together the previous three regulated accounting designations, that was CAs, CGAs, and CMAs, under one body and under the new Chartered Professional Accountant title. That moment on July 1st, 2015, was the culmination of a long process in Alberta and across Canada. It represented an historic shift in the evolution of the regulated accounting profession. With the 10th anniversary of the legislation proclamation this year, it's a perfect time to look back at the unification process and celebrate the progress of the profession in Alberta over the last decade. To help with that, I'm joined by two people who were in the room where it happened, as the old saying goes. But these two weren't just in the room. They were vital leaders of the profession at the crucial moments of unification. It was that leadership that pushed the unification process over the finish line and helped make the goal of unification a reality in Alberta. Rachel Miller FCPA FCA was the CEO of one and then two of the legacy regulatory bodies at the time of unification. She spearheaded much of the unification work in Alberta, work which included consulting with the provincial government on what the new regulated profession would look like and how its legislation would be drafted. She was named the first CEO of CPA Alberta, the regulatory body for the new unified profession, and she continues to hold that position today. Greg Draper FCPA FCGA was the first ever board chair of CPA Alberta, a position that was the culmination of years of leadership in the profession, primarily at the governance level. During the unification process, Greg guided many provincial and national planning discussions and worked diligently to promote the concept of unification across Alberta. Greg has had a distinguished career in both accounting and law enforcement, and today serves as CEO of Commissionaires Southern Alberta. I'm looking forward to talking with Rachel and Greg about unification and the CPA profession over the last 10 years. So let's get started. Welcome, Rachel and Greg.
Thanks, Gordon.
Well, first off, congratulations on this 10th anniversary. What does it mean to each of you to reach this milestone in the evolution of the accounting profession? Rachel, you want to answer that one to start?
Sure. First of all, wow, where'd the last 10 years go? Greg and I were just reminiscing a little bit before we started here, and I was saying one of the biggest challenges we had working together is, you can't see this since it's a podcast, but he's over 6 feet tall, and I'm probably just under 5 feet tall. So adjusting microphones, that was our biggest challenge, right?
It's good that we have our own microphones for this session.
Yes.
And sitting down, so that's helpful. But yeah, looking back, wow, 10 years seemed to pass very, very quickly. We actually just celebrated our Elevate events, which celebrate the profession in Kananaskis over the weekend, where we celebrate some of our top CPAs in the profession and really just network and have fun. And hard to believe we're over 32,000 members now, over an 18% growth since unification, and things are going strong.
Wow. How about you, Greg? What does the anniversary mean to you?
You know, I have for the last 10 years been referring to July 1st, 2025 as Barth Bradley Day.
Excellent.
It's probably a board inside discussion, but as you know, the tagging requirement of legacy designations was something that could have gone into regulations or into bylaws or into statute, and I think given the organization some flexibility as to when that came off. And that's why you've seen the tagging requirements dropped in other provinces at different times. But Barth a board member at the time was quite adamant on that and persuaded the board to decide to put it into, I think, the statute, which required it to be a full 10 years without any option. So I lovingly refer to it as Barth Bradley Day. So it's been a long time coming. This really is, I think, the end of that implementation phase, right, where we can start to let those go and focus just purely on CPAs and celebrate not only the new grads that are coming into the profession, but our shared history as one profession.
Yeah, maybe just expanding on that on July 1st, the CPAs in Alberta can have more choices as to what they call themselves, and they can just call themselves CPAs. And for the last 10 years, only those who have come through the CPA program could use the CPA designation on its own. And now all Alberta CPAs can use the designation on their own, and they still have choices to continue to use their legacies if they'd like. And most people are super proud of the CPA now, so I think you'll see a lot more people using that CPA branding alone.
Absolutely.
Well, fantastic. And yeah, happy Barth Bradley Day to all who celebrate, for sure.
Hope you're listening, Barth.
Yeah. And thanks for explaining tagging there, Rachel, for people in our audience who might not know what that term meant. Rachel, I know that when you were named CEO of the former CA regulatory body in 2013, I think it was, you were thrust quite suddenly into the midst of the unification project at a crucial stage. Do you remember what your top priorities were during those first few weeks on the job when it came to unification?
Yeah, I was actually thinking back on that, and I believe it was the CA body at the time board came to me and said, "Hey, we just have this little job for you. Could you take it on for 6 weeks, and then you can go back to your practice review work that you love?" And I was like, "Well, I think I'm good with what I'm doing." And they're like, "No, we'd really like you to just all you got to do is get the vote positive and get unification done 6 weeks top."
No problem.
Looking back, I think maybe they were a little optimistic on the 6 weeks, but my top priority was really visiting at the CAs at the time in the province and talking about unification and how we can strengthen the profession going forward and getting that positive vote to allow us to bring the 3 designations together in Alberta and move the profession forward in that positive way. And gosh, I can't even remember how many presentations and employers and cities I visited. I do remember visiting Grand Prairie on crutches. That was a challenging and fun time. But I will say, looking back, it was one of the most challenging and most fun parts of my professional career. Having tough conversations with our members, but also really building the team, because we were all working towards one goal and having actually positively achieved that goal. And I will say we had the highest vote percentage of any of the legacy bodies in Alberta. So achieving and exceeding that goal, it was a good time. It was fun.
Well, I'm glad the challenge was fun for you, because that makes it all the more rewarding for you personally, I'm sure. Greg, you were deeply involved in unification right from the launch of the initiative nationally in 2011, I think. What were your initial thoughts on unification when you first heard about the concept? Did you have any reservations about it?
No, I was all in, and it's funny. I think back to that age, I was not yet 40 years old, and so sometimes when you're young, you're bold due to lack of experience and wisdom or something like that. So we, I remember when that came about. I was rotating into the chair position at CPA Alberta, and our practice was to have 2 meetings in the same day, one with the old board, and then immediately after, one with the new board with the new chair installed. And in the old board meeting when I was vice chair, the discussion around our table was having our CEO travel to Australia to meet with CPA Australia to talk about establishing mutual recognition and some working relationships with other accounting bodies around the world. And 15 minutes later, when I was chair of the board, I said, "No, we're not doing that. We're going to see what's going on with the merger talks here in Canada." And so Alberta CGAs were the first involved in that tripartite merger discussion, much to the consternation of some of my counterparts across the country. But it just seemed to me to be only logical on a whole bunch of fronts, and so we wanted to chase that down, and was happy to be a big part of that.
It's probably why I thought it was fun. It was 10 years ago. We were a lot younger.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Well, Greg, you said that it was the logical thing to do. So that kind of leads to my next question, which is, why was it the right thing to do at that time for the profession? Who wants to take that one on first?
Yeah, I'll say from my perspective, it just seemed to me that having 3 designations in professional accounting in Canada was confusing to the public. It was confusing to candidates interested in the accounting profession. It was confusing to employers. It divided our voice on matters of business in the economy. It divided our voice on accounting standards across the country and internationally. There was a potential for gaps in the protection of the public that would pose risk to all of our professions. So bringing them together, spending our money on advancing the profession in a united front as opposed to competing with one another just seemed to be the only way forward.
Yeah, and I might add to that. When you look back, each of the legacy designations came about for a particular reason and served a particular market. And as the economy changes, as Canada changed, as what we needed from professional accountants changed, as the education programs of all 3 legacies changed, really we needed to adapt and modernize and come together so that we could protect the public and support our members in the right way and really ensure that we've got that strong economy and strong trust of the business community in Alberta. So.
Well, do you both think that unification was inevitable or in Canada, or could it have gone another way?
That's a tough one. Well, things can always go different ways. There's always choices you can make, and it's sometimes easier to look back and say, yeah, we could have gone a different path. In this case, I think looking back, it was absolutely the right thing to do. I would say from my position when I was brought in to lead the vote we talked about a little bit earlier, Alberta CAs were the only ones not involved. So it was a pretty easy choice for us. It's kind of get on the bus or where are we going to go? So in that case, it was a little bit different position I was in. Looking back, though, we are a stronger profession. We're over 32,000 members in Alberta now driving the CPA profession in the same direction. We've got members across all aspects of Alberta, all sectors of Alberta. We're able to influence in a positive way the business community, ensure we've got the growth here in Alberta. We're a young population in Alberta, and we attract young professionals into Alberta. And I think the unification of the accounting profession has allowed not only for the CPA profession, but for all the businesses to be able to thrive in that environment.
Yeah, well said. Greg, any thoughts on that inevitability question?
I'm glad we ended up where we ended up. I mean, to Rachel's point, things can go in any one of a number of ways, and there were a lot of people and personalities around various tables throughout the process. And there were groups that were in on unification and then other groups that were out at different times and back and forth. It did end up in the right spot. I said the one big lesson that I took away from that whole process that I continue to apply in my career is that everyone likes standardization as long as it's standardized to their way of doing things. And I think that was kind of the hurdle we had to get through. So I'm glad we landed where we did.
Rachel, you had a lot of involvement in working with the government of Alberta on unification. As regulated professions, the 3 unifying bodies needed the support of the government as well as new legislation to formalize the process. What was that part of the unification job like for you, Rachel? And was government supportive of unification?
Well, those of you who know me know I'm a standards and regulation geek. I still read the handbook for fun. And so that was actually one of the most rewarding parts of the process for me. I got to work with the department within the ministry we reported to at the time, as well as our senior leaders from our profession, legal counsel, to draft the CPA Act and bringing the 3 designations together. We were already under one act, RAPA it was called at the time, the Regulated Accounting Professions Act, I believe. But we each had our own regulations. And so we started from a good spot in Alberta in that were already under one act. And this allowed us to bring those regulations together, look at the best of all of the legacy designations and bring it together into one to modernize our legislation. And we were super lucky because many professions in Alberta's acts are old. They hadn't been revised since the 60s and 70s. And we were able to not only bring the designations together and work positively with the government, but the government was also interested in modernizing legislation for professionals. And so they did a lot of work looking at what was happening around the world and in other provinces. And so the CPA Act not only brought the designations together, it was also one of the most modern pieces of legislation in Alberta for professionals. And we were able to work positively, and we had tons of support from the government for that to produce really a piece of legislation that hasn't substantially changed in the last 10 years. So I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, it was a good chance to future-proof the regulation of professions in Alberta and set us as the standard bearer yet again for how these matters are conducted and regulated. I look at, for example, the challenges the engineers had recently about software engineers using that title and all that. And I know during the drafting of our legislation, there was some discussion about whether we could regulate the word accountant, small a accountant. And I think the government at that time, if I recall, sort of thought that to be a step too far, which likely was the right thing to do for our profession to not appear to be discouraging competition and limiting other people from making livings in different ways without undermining the value of the CPA.
Yeah, and really allow us to protect the title professional accountant. So there's definitely a way for the general public to understand who's regulated and where they need to go to should they have any issues with their professionals as well. So.
Can either of you comment on how that new piece of legislation in 2015 helped to protect the public, and what does that term mean to protect the public?
Well, this is totally a Rachel question. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Really, the mandate of the CPA profession is outlined within the Act, and it's really protecting the public, ensuring the competency of our members, and supporting the profession here in Alberta. Our act was one of the only ones. I'll talk about maybe the Professional Governance Act that just got passed at the end of this that really outlined a more modern disciplinary and tribunal process so that if the public has concerns with the performance of their accountants or determines there might be unprofessional behavior, there's a process, a very clear process outlined within the Act that we go through to ensure that the public is protected. And if they are harmed by a CPA, we're able to discipline that CPA in a very transparent and accountable way. The Act also allows us to communicate to the public as to any CPAs who have been through that discipline process and found guilty of unprofessional conduct, which allows the public to know that when they do hire a CPA, that CPA is in good standing with the CPA body and they can rely on the work that CPA does. The Act has really stood the test of time. We haven't really changed it in the last 10 years significantly. It was a modern piece of legislation, like I mentioned. And the government just went through a process where they're combining 22 professions here in Alberta together. And the CPAs are one of those professions under Professions Governance Act. And that act is based on the CPA Act. And so it does show that act was very well put together, was modern, and is seen as, the gold star for protecting the public. The discipline process is essentially the same as in the CPA Act, and a lot of the sections from the CPA Act are just carry forward right into that Professions Governance Act.
Well, that really speaks to the rigor and thoroughness of that original CPA Act. The fact that so much of it has been used as I guess, inspiration for the new legislation. So that's great to hear. And it's good to know that there is a legislative protection there for for Albertans when it comes to CPAs. So thanks for that explanation. Greg, you worked extensively at the national level to make unification a reality, both before and after the passage of the legislation. Based on that experience, would you say there was a lot of common ground among the legacy professions nationally on the topic of unification? Or was it a bit of a struggle at times to achieve a cohesive national vision for the new unified profession? You sort of touched on that already, but anything more to say about that?
Yeah, certainly, like I said, everyone likes standardization when it's standardized to their way of doing things. One of the things that I've learned through my career too, I said, as you mentioned, Gord, I started in policing, and in policing you are often, like regularly, daily, put in situations where you have to make high stakes decisions in a very short period of time with limited information. And so I've learned that often many of the people around me are not quite as comfortable making those kinds of decisions that quickly. So, building consensus over time. Rachel talked about the series of town hall meetings and information sessions she ran to get us past the vote is important. I remember being at a convocation of one of my other legacy bodies across the country, and a number of the chairs looking at me like I was crazy for initiating this conversation. And I think, quite frankly, the phrase I used was, "That's fine. You go and stay with your mother. I'll let you know when I have the house unpacked." Back, they said, being a little younger and brasher than I might be now, I've had a little more time in oak barrels to round out the tannins. For some of those things. But it was a different view. I know at one point, speaking about bodies being in, being out, the CGA side was out of the conversation. I was in public practice at the time, and my CEO was a former president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Alberta. He called me into his office and said, "So what happened?" And I said, we went there to discuss a merger, and someone else was talking about takeover. And, so sort of once the egos got settled down and people started talking about it, when you get to facts, accountants are empirically driven people. And once you start talking about some of the facts and the emotions get set aside, things moved along, I think, quite quickly from there.
So I guess it'd be fair to say that patience was a virtue for you during that long period of discussion and clarification with members across the country.
Yeah, I get it. There are, and I've seen this many, many times since then with clients I've worked with and organizations I've been involved with, where everyone has a history. The boards all have part of their professional and sometimes personal identity attached in their role in that. And I tell you, I think the unsung heroes of unification were the staffs of all the professional bodies, 3 in every province and 3 nationally, right across, that these folks were asked to put together our profession, knowing that for essentially 2 out of every 3 of them, they were working themselves out of a job and into the next stage of their career. And those are folks who I don't think get enough credit in this process. The level of dedication and professionalism that everyone did throughout that was impressive at the time, and even more humbling to sit back here 10 years on to think about that.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that, especially in Alberta. I think we have amazing staff now, and we had amazing staff back then. Obviously, it's challenging bringing 3 organizations together as one organization. And as Greg mentioned, there's changes that have to happen. And I was just looking back, just shocked at how quickly the staff kind of adjusted, came into their own, took on responsibilities, figured out their places. And I think we had like a 5-year plan to integrate the offices. And I think we were done at year 3. Just as Greg was sort of finishing his first chair term, we were already well ahead of the integration process. And that's 100% due to the type of people who work in the profession and for the profession.
Well, thanks both of you for that. That does make me wonder, was that a really hard part of the job for you, bringing those 3 organizations together and perhaps saying goodbye to some people whom you've known or worked with for a long time?
Yeah, I could say the board was mindful of that, obviously, but it would have been Rachel on the front lines of those for the most part, so she's probably best positioned to add the detail.
Yeah, I think that was challenging. I think the way we approached it was in a very respectful way, and in a way that really valued the staff. And every single staff member we had brought something to the table. And as we built the new organization, really spending time to find out what are the things that they're passionate about, what are the things they want to work in, and understanding the type of organization we were going to be. It was going to be a lot larger than the 3 legacy organizations. And we had some really good conversations about what that meant, what changes that might mean. And for some staff, some really great conversations about, is that a type of organization you want to work for? There are benefits and there's also challenges. And I think by having that open door policy where staff could come in and really just talk things through, we were able to ensure that all of our staff were looked after through the process, and that we were able to build that strong team with cohesive values, integrity, respect, kindness, in order to move the profession forward. And many of our staff who are no longer working at CPA Alberta are still connected, or still volunteering, or are still calling us up every once in a while. A few are, for instance, we have a couple in recruitment now. They're recruiting CPAs into the profession. So I would say we really did a good job, I think, of transitioning people to where they could be most successful.
Well, thanks for that. You've really, I think, talked quite openly and candidly about the impact on the staff. Let's expand that a bit. And can you both talk about what the impact of unification has been over the last 10 years, both for CPAs themselves and for their clients and employers? Rachel, you want to kick that one off?
Oh, I just pointed to Greg. We'll let Greg kick it off.
Oh, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, it's interesting. I said during the unification process in early stages, I was a partner in public practice, and I often had a chance to speak with new grads, and a lot of times I would ask them about what they thought about unification, what they thought about it, and at that stage of life, as you might imagine, a lot of them hung their hat on the UFI, or now the CFI, right? The exam process was that badge of honor, and I, perhaps provocatively, was able to kind of just pick that apart just a little bit about, is it really a differentiator in the caliber of profession that or professional that was born of that process, and have them think about things in a different way and move on. I think absolutely it has been a benefit to employers. You can look at experience, not just education and or training. You can trust that a CPA has an appropriate training, regardless of where they receive that training, and then really it's evaluating on hard and soft skills that you need for a particular role. I think from the public, to streamline the regulatory process and know there's a standard code of conduct and compliance perspective is great. I know I've used it to validate employment and members in good standing. I know I read the Complaints Inquiry Committee reports that come out every quarter, or whatever it is, and in part because I've spent much of my career in the investigation space. And
at least someone reads them then.
That's the first part I go to when that newsletter comes out. I'm just like, one, it's a little bit gossipy. Like, do I know who that is? Have I seen that person? But it is often just interesting to see the trouble that people find themselves in. But that comes from me spending 30 years in the investigation space too. But I think honestly, that was one of my concerns when I you think through my practice. I was a police officer that learned accounting. I think any professional needs to know what it is they know, what it is they don't know. So, my practice was forever in the space of financial crime investigations, because that's where my training and experience and skills were. It scared me a little bit as a board member in our legacy, that because I had studied tax to and audit to, that if I got insurance, a subscription to the handbook, and took a 2-day class, I could open my own practice. Now, I probably would not have survived my first practice inspection, but from right, because there was a good, practice inspection oversight process. But that scared me a little bit. I thought, no, that's just wrong. We need to raise the bar up for some of those things. So I was happy to bring the best of each of those three legacy professions and organizations and put them together for the benefit of Albertans.
Yeah, and maybe just sort of expanding on that, I think the CPA opens doors. So getting your designation is really important. It's really the first step, though. It's what you do with your designation after that makes the big difference. And having an organization with diverse perspectives at the table and diverse businesses, diverse education streams, diverse areas where people have come from, it really ensures that you're able to succeed and build on that initial designation and really do whatever you want in the future. And so having sort of 32,000 members that you can network with, that you can use as mentors, that you can call on when you need them, it really helps you be successful. And so as a CPA, getting your designation brings you into the profession. Really, you can soar as high as you want once you get in the profession. And because we're all together, you've got that many more colleagues and friends to call on to help you get to where you want to go.
Yeah, it's so true. My oldest daughter, who was in kindergarten when I started this process, is now a BCom student at University of Calgary. And she originally went into business thinking she'd go on to law school and but didn't want to be a lawyer necessarily, wanted to be a CEO, frankly. And in her first accounting class, as she got through that, I said, you will know more about how businesses work from this one class than you will from 3 years in law school. A legal education is a fantastic education, but if you want to run a business, you need to speak the language of business, and that's accounting. And so much the same thing. She sees that as she's now planning on doing her CPA when she gets through and is doing the prereq courses now, with the understanding that credential can take her anywhere she wants to go.
Can we just have to pause for a moment to blow my mind that your daughter is now in university? We're going to catch up on that a little bit later. Yeah. I'm also a grandma now, so we'll have to
That's interesting. All right, so we'll swap pictures after
So after this podcast, we're doing our whole other thing.
So are you saying that in the last 10 years, other things have happened in your lives besides unification? Is that what you're trying to say?
Shockingly.
Yeah.
Oh, Greg, that's fantastic news about your daughter. And
yeah, thank you.
So, Greg, I want to go back and visit a prediction you made 10 years ago. I know this is always a dangerous thing to do, but back in 2015, Greg, you did an interview with CPA Alberta's Dividends magazine, and in that interview you said, and I quote, "My vision is that as a profession, we can move beyond competition and start to influence the business community, government, and the economy." Would you say, Greg, that your vision has become a reality in the last 10 years?
I think that has become a reality. I don't know that it's because it was my vision, but nevertheless, we are there. I think there's no longer, it seems to be a much lower level of confusion amongst the public about what a CPA is, as opposed to, what's the difference between this credential or that credential. We've had CPAs serve as finance ministers of this province and other elected officials, and I think there's a greater appreciation of financial acumen and expertise and corporate boards and not-for-profits and government and sort of in all sectors of the economy that they're seeing. I think that the lack of competition breeds collaboration amongst our profession. To Rachel's point, is you don't just have 10,000 colleagues; you've got 32,000 colleagues that you can leverage to advance your career, to support the interests of organizations you're passionate about, and to hold up and rise up to what their contributions are.
Yeah, well, working on this podcast over the last 9 or 10 months, I've spoken to literally dozens and dozens of recent CPA grads, CPAs kind of in the middle of their careers, and CPAs who are celebrating 60 years in the profession. And there hasn't been one person who hasn't said the kinds of things you just said, Greg, speaking about the benefits of unification, the strength of the profession as a result. So I think the vision that you laid out in that interview 10 years ago was very prescient indeed. Rachel, do you have any thoughts on Greg's vision for the profession?
Yeah, Absolutely agree with what Greg has said here. And I like to say we're saving the world one CPA at a time. And when you look at what's happening in the world right now, it's a bit of a joke, but it's also a little bit true. When you look at tariffs, when you look at interprovincial mobility, when you look at sustainability, when you look at the challenges that come with all of those things and the opportunities, CPAs are very well positioned to be able to help navigate through those issues and really help the businesses in Alberta thrive in face of some of the things that are happening, including artificial intelligence, ensuring you've got those good analytical skills, that financial acumen that Greg mentioned, bringing the profession together. We're in a really good position to be a strong profession to help Albertans really succeed through those things.
Yeah, well, thank you both. This has been an excellent discussion, and I want to wrap up with one final question for both of you to answer if you see fit. Looking back over the last 10 years, is there anything that has surprised either of you when it comes to the evolution of the CPA profession in Alberta since unification? Any surprises?
Rachel, you see it every day.
Yeah, I mean, it did surprise me, as I mentioned, how quickly we did come together. As Greg mentioned in one of the answers to his questions, there were some people who had some different opinions as to whether we should move forward together as one profession. And there's a few of them who said, we will never use the CPA. And I think every once in a while I see something come across my desk where it's that individual with CPA after their name. So I think really surprised me how well things went and that we were able to achieve our goals there, and that the profession is attractive to new students coming in, like Greg's daughter. And we are seeing that continued growth. And really, we're able to move on and talk about things that are really impacting the future. I think that did happen a lot quicker in Alberta, especially given that the 3 designations came together a little bit later in Alberta and then some other provinces. And I think we moved forward together a little bit earlier than in some other provinces.
Yeah, and I'd say, not so much a surprise, but maybe I think the real benefits of unification are yet to reveal themselves. I look at the changing technology, the impacts of things like artificial intelligence, what they mean for our profession. And I think the increased diversity of backgrounds, skill sets, and worldviews that our profession collectively holds positions us best to deal with some of those things, right? To leverage technology for better rather than using it to work ourselves out of a profession. I back for as long as I've been in the accounting profession, we've talked about, moving towards being a trusted advisor rather than a trusted historian. And, AI, new technologies is going to beat us there if we don't, harness it ourselves. And it's interesting to see that being embedded into the education program at universities already. And, so I think if we're glad about unification now, just wait 5 years and see how we feel about it then.
Well, thanks for that glimpse into the future. And thank you both, Rachel Miller and Greg Draper, for coming in today and talking about these 10 years since unification. It's been a great discussion, and I really appreciate having this opportunity to chat with you both. Thanks for making this wrap-up episode of Season 1 of our podcast such a memorable one. As we look back on the growth and success of the CPA profession since unification 10 years ago, it's clear that your hard work and commitment a decade ago were essential factors in making that growth and success possible. So congratulations on what must be a very meaningful anniversary to both of you. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Gordon.
As I said earlier, this is the last episode of Season 1 of the Uncommon Sense podcast. We'll be back with another season of new episodes in August. In the meantime, watch for some of our most memorable episodes from the past to be reposted during July. This retrospective look back will include some of our favorite episodes from the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center's predecessor podcast, Straight from the CPA's Mouth. On behalf of everyone at the CPA Education Foundation, home of the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center, thank you for being a loyal listener of Uncommon Sense. See you in August. The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Centre was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Heshey. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshey CPA Knowledge Centre, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.